Welcome to Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com, the show where we explore key moments from the history of conflict, from ancient battlefields to modern warfare. This is episode 53, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The Battle of the Little Bighorn is one of the most famous clashes in American military history, a moment when the unstoppable myth of Western expansion ran straight into a wall named Sitting Bull. Known to many as Custer's last stand, it has been argued over for nearly 150 years. The truth is a mixture of bravery, mistakes, miscommunication, and some rather spectacular overconfidence. Throughout the 19th century, the United States government increasingly pushed westward. Treaties with indigenous nations were signed with one hand and undermined with the other. The Great Plains, long home to the Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, became the target of settlers, the railroad, and ambitious politicians. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 temporarily slowed the rush by granting the Black Hills and surrounding lands to the Lakota people. Unfortunately, when gold was discovered in the Black Hills in the mid-1870s, the treaty began to look more like a suggestion than a promise. Prospectors flooded the region, and the U.S. government ordered all Lakota to return to reservations. Many, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, refused. They had already been forced off too much land and had no interest in abandoning their nomadic lifestyle or their sovereignty. By early 1876, the army prepared a major campaign to bring them in by force. 3 separate military columns moved into the northern plains, hoping to surround and defeat the indigenous people. One of them was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, a flamboyant cavalry officer whose fondness for personal glory was only rivaled by the shine of his golden hair. In June 1876, Custer and the 7th Cavalry were part of Brigadier General Alfred Terry's column, tracking native encampments along the Little Bighorn River in what is now Montana. Scouts reported a large village nearby. How large was up for debate. Some said there were roughly 800 warriors. Others believed the number was closer to 2,000. Custer, confident in his own skill and accustomed to facing smaller groups, assumed the lower estimate. It would not be the last time he placed optimism over caution. The indigenous encampment was much larger than many American officers realized. Thousands of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho people had gathered for the annual Sundance ceremony. This was not a small raiding group. This was a community defending its way of life. Sitting Bull, a respected Hunkpapa Lakota leader and spiritual figure, had recently performed a Sundance ritual in which he reportedly had a vision of soldiers falling into the Lakota camp like grasshoppers from the sky. Many took this as a sign that victory was close. Crazy Horse, a fearless Oglala Lakota war leader, was prepared to make that vision a reality. Other legendary warriors such as Two Moons, Gall, and Crow King were also present, ready to fight. Custer's scouts fulfilled every scout's worst nightmare. They discovered that the village was far bigger than anyone had expected. Some even tried to convince Custer that attacking immediately would be a terrible idea. Custer, however, feared that if he delayed, the encampment would attempt to scatter. He wanted a decisive victory, and he wanted it quickly. Waiting for reinforcements was not his style. On 25th June 1876, Custer divided his regiment into 3 battalions. Captain Frederick Benteen was sent to the left to block potential escape routes. Major Marcus Reno was ordered to charge the southern portion of the village. Custer himself took roughly 210 men and moved north, intending to strike from another direction. The plan assumed panic would spread through the village. Instead, it was the beginning of a disaster. Reno's battalion reached the village first and charged in on horseback. What he encountered was not a frightened population running for cover, but an organized defense led by experienced warriors. Reno quickly ordered his men to dismount and form a skirmish line inside the timber along the edge of the village. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Warriors began flanking his men. Panic set in. Reno ordered a retreat across the river to higher ground. It turned into a chaotic dash for survival. About a quarter of his command was killed in minutes. Reno and his surviving men retreated to what would later be known as Reno Hill. There, Benteen's battalion joined them. Benteen had been slow in responding to Custer's orders to come quickly, partly because he considered the orders confusing, and partly because Custer had a reputation for rushing into trouble. Regardless, the two battalions were now pinned down by overwhelming numbers. They dug in for a desperate defense that lasted 2 days. While Reno fought for his life, Custer's battalion advanced along the ridgeline to the north. Exact details of what happened next remain uncertain. There were no survivors from Custer's direct command. Archaeology, native oral history, and army accounts from afar paint a picture of confusion, shock, and a rapid collapse of command. Warriors led by Crazy Horse and others struck Custer's men with speed and coordination. The soldiers tried to form defensive firing lines across the ridges, but the sheer number of warriors overwhelmed them. Dust, gunfire, fear, and shouting filled the air. Cavalry carbines were powerful at range but slow to reload. Native warriors, many armed with repeating rifles obtained through trade, could fire much faster. Custer and around 42 men made their final stand on a small hill later called Last Stand Hill. This image has been dramatized countless times, usually showing Custer heroically firing until the bitter end. The reality was likely far less cinematic and far more chaotic. Within roughly an hour, the entire battalion had been wiped out. Custer's body was found surrounded by dead troopers, marked with several wounds, including 2 fatal shots. His golden hair, so distinctive in paint and myth, was not scalped, despite later claims. News of the disaster first reached the outside world through Terry and Benteen's relief arrival, discovering bodies strewn across the battlefield. The defeat stunned the United States. Just weeks after the nation's centennial celebrations, the victory of indigenous warriors over a famed American Army unit became a national humiliation. For the Lakota and their allies, the battle proved that unity and determination could defeat even a professional army. Celebrations ran high, and Sitting Bull's Sundance prophecy seemed fulfilled. Native warriors had protected their families, their land, and their freedom. Although the Battle of the Little Bighorn was a significant indigenous victory, it did not change the larger outcome of the Plains Wars. The US government responded with overwhelming military force. Public anger demanded revenge, and policy hardened. Winter campaigns targeted food supplies and horses, forcing surrender. Sitting Bull and his followers eventually fled to Canada, but returned to the United States several years later under starvation conditions. He was killed in 1890 during a botched arrest by tribal police. Crazy Horse surrendered in 1877 and was killed shortly afterwards while in custody. Within just a few years of the battle, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples were confined to reservations, their independence crushed. The 7th Cavalry, meanwhile, rebuilt its image and continued to serve, though Custer's leadership became the subject of fierce historical debate. Some idolized him as a tragic hero, others viewed him as reckless, vain, and responsible for the deaths of his men. The Battle of the Little Bighorn remains one of the most studied battles in American history. It has inspired books, films, monuments, and passionate arguments. Archaeological digs have helped clarify the engagement, showing it was not a romantic last stand, but a rapid and overwhelming tactical defeat. Many Native people view the battle as a symbol of resistance and courage. For others, it is a lesson in overconfidence and poor planning. The battlefield today is a national monument where the graves of soldiers share the landscape with memorials honoring indigenous warriors. This recognition reflects a growing awareness that history is more than one side's story. While Custer's golden-haired legend once dominated the conversation, voices from native nations have increasingly been given proper weight, helping paint a fuller picture of what truly happened. The Battle of the Little Bighorn was a turning point in the story of the American West. For a brief moment, native resistance halted the United States' advance and proved that courage and unity can reshape the battlefield. Yet despite that dramatic victory, overwhelming political and military power soon extinguished indigenous independence on the plains. In the end, Custer's last stand became a symbol of myth-making, while the Lakota and Cheyenne victory became a reminder of the high stakes of survival. The fierce determination shown on both sides guarantees that the Little Bighorn will remain carved into history, not just as a fight, but as a clash between two worlds with very different futures. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com. If you did, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.